today, guys. Huge news today, guys. I absolutely wasn't expecting to be recording another video today, but there's something currently blowing up on Reddit. It is ongoing as I produce this video, but I believe it's basically sizzled down. Word on the street is Colin Johanson has left Arenanet, or is leaving Arenanet. And in response to this, Arenanet have done a huge Ask Me Anything on Reddit, where they were fairly candid about a whole bunch of different systems in the game, and they really had a lot of deaths. This is a huge post with hundreds of comments that I was thrilled reading through, and I figure, hey, not everybody's going to have the time to go through all of this, so I want to sum up to you guys exactly what we learned from it, and what all of this, I guess, could mean. So, number one, if you don't know, Colin Johanson has been game director for Guild Wars 2 for a while now. He was heavily involved, front-end, forward-facing with the community at both the release of Guild Wars 2 and the release of Guild Wars 2 Heart of Thorns. So a lot of people recognize him. He's very well known for his big smile. He's been on a lot of the streams, and generally has always been very enthusiastically at the forefront of the game's development. I mean, hell, you could just watch any random PvP stream usually and you'd find Colin's there in the chat. He generally seemed very active and was someone that I think a lot of people in the community ended up really enjoying and being happy about his presence. Now, the funny thing is, for a lot of MMOs, after a big release, you tend to find, especially if the big release doesn't do well, there's a bit of an exodus of devs. It's kind of a trope with MMOs, and I feel like Arenanet are kind of in that a bit with Heart of Thorns. Colin now leaving, Colin being a very big, high-profile person to leave, I suppose, is not entirely unprecedented. There have been a steady trickle of other people, most of them going to Amazon Game Studios. Yeah, Amazon do actually have a game development branch, and many of the bigger faces from Guild Wars 2 have actually ended up going there. Everyone, I guess, is going to have their own personal reasons. Personally, I have always felt that a single dev leaving shouldn't be something we focus on too much. After all, it's a big company with 300 people. There are a lot of moving pieces, and usually if somebody goes, it's not necessarily going to have a massive knock-on effect on anything else. It doesn't necessarily herald the end of the game or whatever, as a lot of people would like to have said. But with Colin, I suppose it is a little bit different. With Colin, you've got the game director. You've got someone who has been massively influential, both behind the scenes and in front of, you know, the community themselves, talking to them a lot. And it feels kind of weird to see someone like this go. It's funny, Jeff Grubb recently left. He's been one of the primary world builders and narrative directors, I guess would be a term for him, at Arenanet for a long time. He left, and it's funny, whenever one of these people have disappeared, there's usually been a comment saying, oh god, as long as Colin doesn't leave, it'll be fine. And today it was announced that Colin is leaving, and I guess Arenanet wanted to do some immediate damage control. Immediately be right there with the community, talk to them, and assure them that this isn't, you know, hell on earth erupting here. Now, Colin does leave a couple of messages in this Ask Me Anything about his departure. And so I'll read those quotes out for you guys. We'll just take him at face value and try not to dive too much into speculating about people's personal lives, because, hey, that's always fun to do on the internet, right? So he says, an opportunity came up that allows me to see my family far more, support my wife on a project she is tackling after years of her supporting me, and a chance to cut my commute down to 0 from an epic commute I have today. For now, I'd rather let this discussion be about the future of Guild Wars 2 and leave my own future to that, which I think is totally fair enough. There was another clarification as well. He says, I just want to reinforce this is an opportunity for me to get closer to my home, family, and try something new. After 11 years at Arenanet now, I have nothing but love for this team, game, and community. I'll be rooting for all of you. Of course, it's easy to be the cynic here and believe that this is, you know, just all PR crap, and he actually hates Guild Wars 2, and he sees it as a sinking ship and he's running off. But I'll take it at face value. I mean, hell, if I can relate to anything he just said, it is the feeling of having a horrendous, horrible commute, eating those precious hours out of your day, and then eventually giving up your job to do something from home. So, good luck to him, I guess. On a more speculative level that isn't just, oh, Guild Wars 2's dying and the game director's quit. I do wonder a little if it's the added stress of being both in front of everyone and being the game director. I mean, being in that position, he kind of becomes this thing that's bigger than the game, right? You get random assholes like me talking about him on the internet for something that should really be quite private and personal to someone, I suppose, to an extent, and that's just their job, right? So I can't imagine having all those added layers. We have, of course, heard about quite a few devs who were very forward and very front of house before Guild Wars 2's launch and then just sort of receded into the background, and many of those are still there. So with all that said, the more interesting thing to me isn't his motivations on leaving and the hollow hole in my heart that now he's gone, but rather the topic of who will be replacing him, looking to the future. Now, for the interim, they did reveal that stepping up as game director is going to be Mike O'Brien, but that is only going to be a temporary solution. So if this isn't a name you recognize, this guy was one of the first 3 founders of Arenanet. He is the only one left. He has been there the entire time. Usually he's a lot more quiet and he's not around so much in terms of interfacing with us, but he will appear for big things. For example, when an expansion is announced, when the game in general is announced, big moments like this, that's the guy that's been coming on stage. He actually co-hosted, I suppose you could say, the presentation on stage at PAX South around this time last year with the reveal of Heart of Thorns. So it was both of those two, and I think if you're going to have anyone replace Colin, even if only for a little while, he basically is the only guy that they could have chosen, but it does have to remain temporary. He says running a company takes a lot of his time, and there will be a new hire eventually to step up. So I wonder, are they going to do that from within? I mean, I guess if you're working at Arenanet right now, you must be thinking that. Unless they've already had some kind of big company meeting about it, which I'm sure they probably have, considering how many of them were involved on this AMA here. Or are they going to be hiring from outside? That's going to be interesting. What's going to be interesting to me too is, are they going to reveal when that new hire comes in? Are we going to have like a meet the new director? Are they going to make sure that this person has a nice big smile? Or is this person going to be as hands-on as Colin was? Who knows? But it could influence quite a lot for the direction of the game. I'm curious what you guys think they should go for there. So let's move on to the damage control section of the Reddit thread, and this is the huge Ask Me Anything they did, clarifying a whole ton of points. I'll actually give kudos to Mike as well. At the top of this post, immediately after talking about Colin's departure, they were very, very open with us on exactly how the company is structured, on what they're doing for the future. Remember these discussions we've been having for years now of, hey, how are Arenanet going to do expansions and also support a live game? Remember how recently I was still audibly complaining on videos that they came out to us and said, yeah, we're going to support both now. We're going to do Living World and expansions now, guys. Don't worry, we can do both. And then they never really clarified exactly how that was working. Well, here they clarified it. Really hats off to them here. They gave us an exact, down to the number of devs split on the amount of people working on live updates versus the number of people currently working on an expansion versus the number of people who kind of can swap between the two teams. They've been as basically transparent as I would ever expect a game company to be, so that's quite nice. And this further comes with some clarifications about the release cadence of the Living World Season 3 and so on. Which, by the way, is not necessarily good news. We'll get to that in just a moment, though. So, what I'm going to do, guys, is to save you from having to read the entire thread, I'm going to go through quick fire and give you all the juicy bits of information, complete with images on the screen. If you want to get more context, just feel free to pause the video. Some of these are going to be very quick fire, and we'll just roll straight on through because there's quite a lot of information. Here we go. Number 1, Super Adventure Box. Obviously, people have to ask about Super Adventure Box. April 1st is coming up, and obviously we need to know. The news is exactly the same, that it is coming. The same information we had a long time ago, for what it's worth, in a Guild Mag article that blew up in Arenanet's face, but it is coming, just no date, no details whatsoever. Is it going to be permanent when it comes back? All that kind of stuff they're being very cagey about. But more clarifications from the devs recently about Super Adventure Books than we've seen in the preceding months. So maybe you can ride that, that theory chain, but we'll see. Next, they did indeed confirm that new fractals are in development. Not much more to say there. There were some interesting posts about it shortly in a moment, though. But yes, new fractals are in development, and it sounds like there are a lot of changes. Don't forget, there is a dedicated fractal team now. Heart of Thorns came out. They decided they didn't like the way the fractals were going. They made a dedicated team for fractals shortly after Heart of Thorns. I guess we'll be seeing the fruits of their labor at some point in the near future. Next, Missing armor. This is pretty cool. Actually, there are a few sets of armor that ever since they changed PvP reward systems a long time ago have been inaccessible. So what am I talking about? For example, the tribal armor. This actually you see my elementalist wear on some videos. I used to use it for the Condi set before I went for kind of burning theme. But the tribal armor was a PvP gear set that presumably once was available in PvE, but then maybe got removed with certain vendors or something. But by the time Guild Wars 2 Raw launched, it wasn't available anywhere except PvP, and it was fairly easy to get. But then Arenanet decided, no, look, this crazy split we've done where PvP is a completely separate reward structure from PvE, it's not a good idea. Let's combine it all together. And when they did that, you could no longer get the armor. So there are a couple of accounts like mine out there that have some of these really unique exclusive armor sets that no one else has available to them whatsoever. And that seems like a real shame considering how frequently, even up until this AMA here, the devs keep talking about how hard it is for them to implement armor. And it's like, well, look, you've got a couple of sets right there that just, all you need to do is implement them. A little bit like the Revenant weapons we saw from the Heart of Thorns betas. Why don't you do this? And we did have confirmation again that they're going to do it. I would quite like to see, for what it's worth, when this gear comes back, that they actually tie it to proper Living World rewards or proper reward structures in new maps and so forth like that, rather than just, oh, here's a random vendor that has it. I mean, they've got a good reward here. You tie it to some new content. I don't think that's too much of a shame, but maybe I'm only saying that because I already have the gear and I wouldn't have to work for it. I don't know. It's not like this is crazy legendary stuff. I just think doing stuff in-game to be rewarded with gear is a cool thing. Next, Living World. Alright, this is the sad one, and I guess we'll get it out of the way with early. They said, when asked when Living World will come back, they say it will begin in the quarterly release after the next raid releases. So you might think, well, damn, that's really good. We've got it coming up just this Tuesday, right? It's coming. We got Slothazor, we have Wing 2, this is brilliant. But wait. Not Wing, next raid. So it will not arrive after Wing 2 or Wing 3, and the original tone of that comment makes it sound like it's not until the next raid altogether gets released. And according to another quote from the devs in a moment, that it took them 4 months to produce this next Wing. I believe the devs are basically saying it's going to be about quarter 3 of this year that we finally get Living World. Quarter 3. I mean, honestly, that's like the nightmare situation. I think that is so... I wanted Living World to at least roll in by the end of 2015. How off have I been with some of these things I've wanted for the game? The scope of Heart of Thorns was just such a fraction of what I originally thought it was going to be. The delay until Living World is like the worst case scenario I expected it. Quarter 3, 2016. That is Living World Season 3. We got a bit of a wait. That's not to say that there won't be small updates as well in the meantime. I guess a little bit like the Angry Chest that got added to Lion's Arch. And of course, we do have these raids. We'll probably have some legendary weapons going in the meantime. But man, that's a long wait for the next story. That is a long wait for the next story. And I find it kind of curious that they are absolutely sure it's coming after the next raid releases. Does that mean then that the Living World story is actually going to interface somehow with the raid story, even though they kind of made out like it might not? I don't know. We'll see. Next point, kind of a funny one to me. Back at launch of Guild Wars 2, they did a blog post where they talked about the extended experience. And they talked about this app that you'd be able to get on your phones and your iPad that would allow you to access in-game chat while you were using them, or see the world map and find out where your friends are running around, even when you're not actually at your PC playing the full release game. Cool idea for an app, but it never came true. The devs confirm here actually that when they did that blog post, the intent was there to make this thing, but it never even really existed in that form. And they, after the release of Guild Wars 2, realized that it would be much better to do APIs, focus on those, and let the community take the data and make the apps themselves, because you'd get much more interesting, much cooler stuff. So that was confirmed to not be there. I was kind of shocked to see someone still asking about the extended experience. I mean, really, dude, it's almost been 4 years. It's definitely been 4 years since that blog post. Let's let it drop, shall we? Next was an interesting post from Crystal, one of the raid developers, from somebody who basically said, hey, why are you putting so much effort into raids? It's such a small amount of people that like playing raids, and this seems to be all the focus. Now, I can see why that commenter, for what it's worth, would say something like that. Look at the current updates, look at the current thing that people are really focusing on. It's all about the raids, right? That seems to be the main thing that's being developed. But Crystal does turn around and say, look, actually, you know, we've got 300 people. We've already demonstrated to you in this thread how they're split. My team that that worked on this upcoming wing took 4 months, and we had about 5 or 6 people. Only 5 or 6 people. The rest is completely non-existent, right? There's other teams doing other things. I guess it's kind of one of those weird places where the raid team's doing really well, putting out phenomenal content at a nice pace. And all of a sudden, it feels like that's all that Arenanet is capable of doing, that they're only focusing on the raids. But she's kind of trying to clarify that that's not true. Also, somewhere else on another post, I may as well tack this on, it was explained that the length of the raids and the general structuring of them, as in, you know, Wing 1, we had 4 boss fights and a little encounter section, that will be generally consistent. At the very least, the amount of work the devs put into each raid wing will be generally consistent. So what does that mean? That probably means that you might have a raid wing that has 5 bosses, but they're all a little bit more simplistic design-wise, not necessarily in terms to complete them and so on, and how we as players experience them, but at least in terms to design them, they're generally simplistic. Or you might have a raid wing that has as low as 2 bosses, but they're ridiculously complicated from a design standpoint and, you know, take a lot of effort. So, but I guess that's the ballpark. I'm guessing it's not going to hover any lower than 2 at the very minimum, or any higher than 5 at a max. That's my speculation, but that's kind of what I'm getting from what they're saying. Speaking about raids, next little point, dungeons. This was actually mentioned at least twice in the AMA. The Heart of Thorns expansion, of course, nerfed dungeon rewards. The devs are saying here that that is actually being looked at, and a change will be incoming. So, dungeons may get a little bit more money. And now, I'm not expecting them to go back up to where they were. As a lot of you guys probably know about me, I've always been in the camp that the dungeon reward itself, nerf, wasn't that bad. Dungeons are genuinely actually still worth money, but the knock-on effect that was caused by the community backlash to the nerf, thus making everyone believe no one's in dungeons, thus reducing the amount of people who even consider trying to go to dungeons in the first place, causing this snowball effect, really did cripple them, and they're in a bad place right now. So I think if the devs do buff them up again, even if it's not back to where they were before, we could see a huge, sudden, healthy dungeon population return again. I really do believe that, because some of those dungeons, even at the current state, are still, if you're good at them, really quick ways of earning decent money and just as fun as they ever were. But I guess the point that the gold got nerfed and everyone left kind of shows that they weren't too fun in the first place. And it was really just a thing about the rewards. Next, I was a little disappointed here on the PvP side of things. Hugh responded to someone asking about legendary leaderboards. Now, the way that the game works right now, maybe you guys aren't familiar, they have a leaderboard in-game that shows 5 players, enough for a single team, and it just shows prestige. That's it. Your top 5. There you go. And that sucks. That is awful. I would love to see that be expanded. I'd love to see more information on it. There's actually a community version of the leaderboards, which is way more functional, way more awesome, and could totally be put in-game. I mean, hell, if the community's done it, the devs can as well. But Hugh basically just says, no, we're not looking at it. So no changes to the legendary leaderboards. And I guess the next couple of PvP seasons are once again going to get hampered a bit, at least, I guess, by that. Next was an interesting quote, shall we say. Now, I have a lot of respect for Izzy, and I enjoyed my conversations with him. However, somebody asked, hey, could you explain to us why you don't split skills for PvE, PvP, world versus world? Why must they all be jumbled in together? I think that's an absolutely great question. Isaiah Cartwright, who was a balance dev for Guild Wars 1 and is a prominent dev in Guild Wars 2 also, maybe not so much on the balance side anymore though, he responds by saying something to me that just... it seemed hastily written and kind of just incoherent. I don't see the reasoning, so I'll quote this for you guys here. He says, we are not fully against it being skill balance splitting, but it adds a lot of overhead to every balance and design decisions as you move forward. While it does give you another toolbox, it does lead to optimizing skills heavily for each game type, which does make power creep. Like Mike Z says, and Colin gets blamed for, it's always on the table, and it's something we may use in the future, but we do often find issues are global issues that are just highlighted in one area. So I guess what he's saying is, if there's a problem with something in PvP balance, like people rezzing too fast, then that's an issue everywhere, and it's okay that it got nerfed in PvP because it should have been nerfed everywhere else. But I don't agree with that. I don't agree that all the cool res builds should be nerfed in PvE or in World versus World or whatever the billions of other areas and distinct areas of content are. I don't believe that an entire idea for a build like that should be gone just because of PvP. I don't think that they're always global issues. And I also don't see why balancing for specific game types has to lead to power creep. And I don't see why skill splitting adds more overhead. Surely it's more overhead that every individual decision the devs try to make at every balance pass, they have to have a conversation about how it impacts every single game mode every time. Surely that's more overhead than simply, alright, this is a PvP-based change, let's just do it for PvP, and we don't have to have the discussions about other areas. Right? I don't know. Maybe I'm looking a bit too deep into it, but I'm not particularly satisfied with that one. Moving on, mega servers. This was very cool to hear. Someone said, hey, mega servers are a bit balked. What's going on? And apparently they are reworking mega servers. I didn't expect this. Mega servers you'd think to be one of those huge programming back-end things that is kind of locked in now, and we just gotta kind of like it or lump it. But we know that there have been some mega server issues. When Heart of Thorns first came out, some players were experiencing mostly empty maps. There were tons of people playing the game, but you never really got to see them because of mega servers. Big problem, really hindered some people's enjoyment. Me, personally, I've been struggling with mega servers when it comes to guild halls. And the fact that if you want to bring a lot of people into guild hall to do some kind of cool community-based event, it has to spin up about 1 million different instances, and it's buggy, and it's annoying, and it's rubbish, and it's crap, and it's lame, and it's absolutely not what you want for a community-based feature like a guild hall. So I wonder, are the mega server system changes that are supposedly rolling in over the next couple of months somehow motivated by guild halls? If so, I am very happy, but they didn't really give us any specifics beyond that. Next, a couple of quotes, I suppose, from Leah Hoyer. Leah Hoyer is the narrative director. She was a new hire. I met her back in February of last year. She really doesn't say very much at all, to be honest. She has a post about getting into the industry, and she says some very vague things like, hey, we'll hear more about Rotten Novus and the Egg in Season 3, guys. But that's about it. I don't know to what extent I can blame her for not really being particularly interesting here, though, because story is definitely not something you can give many details on without ruining it. I mean, what are we expecting from the woman? Intricate details about the upcoming plots that are basically just spoiled for us? Well, no, I guess not. Maybe I would have been happier to hear her talk about the detriments and the downsides and the glaring issues with actual Heart of Thorns story, but instead she seemed to just focus on the people who said, hey, your story was great, and kind of left it there. Unless there's a new quote since the video came out, hey. Next, speaking of story, and I guess fractals, somebody did ask, hey, are you thinking of doing a fractal that is Ritlock in the Mists? A lot of people have been wanting this. A lot of people think it's a great idea for a fractal. I have always erred on the side of caution towards this. It looks like Arenanet R2. They say that they've considered it, but Ritlock in the Mists will not be delivered to us as a fractal. We don't know whether it will be delivered to us at all, for what it's worth, but not as a fractal. And the reasoning is simple and I believe bang on point, and that is that fractals are designed to be super repeatable and super short, and, well, not super short, but short enough and fun, right? And Ritlock in the Mist, come on, we'd want a lot of story about that. We'd want a lot of dialogue. We'd want a different pace. And so those two worlds can't really collide too easily. That said, elsewhere on the AMA, they did reveal that there is at least one currently existing encounter in Guild Wars 2 that they are looking at implementing as a fractal. Okay, well, so that could be any number of things from Season 1, in my opinion, but they have at least one main one that they would very much like to do, and that, I guess, is at least one of the new Fractal Islands that they're currently working on from the Fractal team. Moving on, Living World as well. Not only do we have to wait, this is another bad one, unfortunately, guys. Not only do we have to wait until Q3 of this year to even see Living World return, it will not return with a 2-week cadence. The Arenanet logic here is that every 2 weeks, while it was okay for players, it really probably burned them out, and they're saying that they had to focus on the deadline more than they could focus on the quality of the releases, and that they felt too forced, and so when Living World comes back, it won't be on 2-week releases. It will probably be quarterly, but then that's speculation from me. The funny thing is, they reiterate that comment a couple of times. I found, honestly, the Season 2 quality to be more than acceptable. It was really, really, really well done. I, of course, would love to see that bar get pushed a little bit further, and I believe it does need to get pushed a little bit further for the game to, really, really grow out of Living World. And I also believe that there is such a thing as too much content and not enough time for people to digest it or to circulate into general gaming media and maybe attract new customers. So 2 weeks probably was too much for them, but there's your confirmation, guys. That is also probably a result of the fact that they are now simultaneously developing an expansion and Living World together, instead of being purely on the Living World team as they were back in 2014 or 2013. Very quick little one here as well, just to nip some speculation in the bud. I think this is fairly obvious to a lot of us. Elite specializations in the future are not going to be coming as Living World patches and so on. Elite specializations are expansion-based things, and people should know that for now. I mean, come on, they're going to be. That was so obvious. That was one of the main selling points of the entire expansion. Some stories about legendary weapons. Yes, they're still working on them. I talked about it just in a Q&A video earlier today, but some more details actually. Supposedly, the short bow and the mace are the ones that are furthest along in development right now out of all the legendary weapons. Does that mean, wooden potatoes, that those are the next ones we're going to see? Not necessarily. They didn't say that. Let's not play Chinese whispers. They just said that those two are the nearest along in development. Speaking of stuff that's taking a while to come out, guild anthems were mentioned. You guys might remember before Heart of Thorns when they were talking about guild features, they mentioned the idea of having an anthem that you can choose for your guild, and it would be a song associated with you that would perhaps play, for example, at the end of a PvP match. That never made it into the game. I don't know how many of you guys noticed that's not in the game, and it was basically confirmed that they're not working on it at the moment. There's better stuff to be working on, but it is something they want to go back to. This is basically an alternate version of, hey guys, it's on the table, but just under some papers right now. Not particularly informative as far as where the game's going, but I did find a really interesting quote from John Smith, who says, raids in MMOs are high-end content designed for the more hardcore player. However, from an analytics standpoint, the participation is higher than other games we've seen. This is likely due to the nature of our progression system in Guild Wars 2. Think about that. Guild Wars 2, the classically seen as casual MMO, where it sees a lot more raid participation percentage-wise than other MMOs. Kind of interesting. I mean, that could either be, hey, their raids are really good, or it could be, hey, there's nothing else to do. You guys can pick your poison there. And last but not least, that I managed to draw from the AMA, at least while I was looking, and as I say, there could be a couple more, there will be a link in the description, was a bit of a discussion from some devs about the Hall of Heroes. You guys will have heard me waxing poetically in nostalgia about this old Guild Wars 1 feature in videos before, and the devs are talking about it here and why it doesn't exist in Guild Wars 2. Those out of the loop, Hall of Heroes was a PvP system where you would form a team, an 8-man team. You would go in, you'd compete against some NPCs just to determine how good your team was, basically. And then you would get thrown into a deathmatch map on a very specific map. If you won the deathmatch map, you would move forward to another map, and then that would be another deathmatch. And if you move forward on that, you'd go into a King of the Hill map on another map. And the idea was, it was almost like a story of you traveling through the underworld and reaching the mists. And every new map you entered was another PvP arena against a bunch of other players, and it had some really insane, awesome features, like some maps where there were 6 teams all battling all at once that existed for a little while. And eventually, if you got all the way to the end, you would be able to hold the Hall of Heroes, and other teams would come in and try and push you out of it. And for as long as you held the Hall of Heroes, you'd get perks for your server, basically. It was almost like an automated tournament system. Really cool, and something I've loved and would love to see come back. Here's the devs talking about it. Lindsay Murdoch says, Hall of Heroes was a huge part of my time playing Guild Wars 1. I was one of the leaders of a Heroes Ascent guild. Sorry, if I've been saying Hall of Heroes, I mean Heroes Ascent, that's the name of it. The Spearmen, and we lived there, she says. I have so many fond memories of that game type. I truly did love it. But that said, as a game designer who also worked on Heroes Ascent in the later years, I can tell you it had a lot of problems as a PvP type. It's easy for us to look back at it with rose-colored glasses and reminisce about the good times, but if the conversation turns to why did we not carry it forward, I have to say that its design problems were great, and it was time for us to move on. But oh, the memories. And John Corpening mentions as well, he says, Hall of Heroes and Tombs, Tomb of the Primeval Kings was the original entry outpost for this. He says, we're a huge part of Guild Wars 1. While we love those modes in Guild Wars 1, we wanted to try something different for Guild Wars 2. In Guild Wars 2, we have the unranked arenas as a fun place for people to enjoy, and he basically just says, hey, do the Guild Wars 2 stuff instead. So it makes me sad. I would love clarification, a little more on what exactly was inherently wrong with the game type. What's the problem? Come on, add it back. But hey, it was nice to see this random little thing being talked about. And there you go, guys. That is the mixed, sad, happy day of Colin Johanson leaving Arenanet. And the devs giving us a lot of information on upcoming future stuff. Let me know what you think. This is a pretty huge topic, I'm guessing, for a few of you guys. Keep an eye on the videos over the next couple of days. I'll probably have more thoughts after I get some sleep, and we'll continue the discussion as time goes on. In any case, thanks very much for watching, guys. Hopefully this was more digestible for you than actually reading through the thread, and I'll see you soon. Myth number 1, this was actually the first one I ever filmed. You'll see Liz here rocking out her scientist outfit. And that's that the Kylo windows will shatter but not break with just a little bit of a light touch. Now, some of you who PvP may already know the answer to this one, but as you can see here, I cast my Phoenix on the window and it breaks. If anything really hits these windows,